I've now. All right, welcome back. We are INFR3335U, Social and Multiplayer Game Design in the fall 2021 semester at Ontario Tech University, and it's week 4, part 1 of our broadcast, and we're talking this week about social networks and world building, and let's talk about this. But first, let's see I got some kind of comments in the chat. It's kind of discussing the encounter. Homebrew formatting was also a pain. It is. It's kind of a little bit like LaTeX, right? If you kind of, if you're someone who does any kind of scholarly articles, it's very kind of technical, and it's not for everybody. And some people just decide not to use it. It was a recommendation, and I think most of you used it. But it's good that you had a chance to figure things out. Jonathan says, you completed new to D&D. You weren't sure when to use the boxes. Ryan says, I liked using it personally. Good. Just kind of winged it. Yeah, just do your best, guys. I mean, again, I don't expect any of you to be experts. There might be some people who've played the game, and that's great. But the most important thing is that you had fun creating it, and the creative process, the idea of putting together some encounter based on a little game world is really the key here. So we're sitting at week 4. This week, we're talking about social networks, some world building, and we're also going to briefly talk about creating a game system, because that is your assignment 3, which I've posted the timeline for, but not all the details yet. That's going to come very soon. Today's about the professional DM in some ways, and that's what Daryl is here to kind of go over, world building as well. And let's go over what we talked about last week. So last week, it was all about designing mobile games, game monetization, industry terms and metrics. We also did a small case study on Magic the Gathering, which was pretty cool. Stuff that was due, most people got this done. Individual assignment 1, build your own D&D encounter, which is what we were chatting about just now. And project part 1, your first playable release with a WebGL build. Most teams got everything in on time, and that's really awesome. Even some of the non-GDW students, I was surprised to see that everyone got together, and there was at least 4 of you, which is awesome. That's great. That means that you're going to be able to, build a project that's reasonable, and it's not going to kill you in terms of time frame, which is good. All right, and so what we're doing this week. So this week we're going to have our guest speaker, Daryl Olson. He's going to be talking about world building and his campaign that he's going to be running for us, actually, called Suncrest. There's also, I'm going to briefly talk about assignment 2 details after Daryl is done, as well as my lecture on social networks, which will be part 2 of this video broadcast that we're going to do. So what's due this week, I've released in-class exercise 2, that's ICE 2, which is this Friday, based on the lecture that, or the little talk that Daryl's going to do just now. It's due this Friday. It's really around, Suncrest and the campaign. Talk about it. Kind of reflect on world building. It's a little blog. Again, it's practice for you and for your midterm exam, which is happening next week. I've also released, again, like the time frame for assignment 3, which is now, it sounds far away, Sunday, November the 7th, but this is where you're going to get together with your group and create your own game system. And the first part is really creating a little combat system of your own. So think about D&D. You have different ability scores. You're going to create perhaps your own, and with your own theme, and make a game, of your own stuff, and maybe something that you can incorporate into your game this semester or next semester, or even something that you want to do in the future. So again, that's the next assignment. It's also a group assignment you're going to be working on together, and there'll be several parts of this. There'll be art involved. There will be some planning involved, some design work, and a bunch of other stuff, because it's not just about creating your own game system, but also a lot of game systems have lore wrapped around them. D&D is a fantasy role-playing game, and the game system is kind of geared around and even the abilities are all around fantasy role-playing game. It can be adapted to other systems, but primarily it's been designed for that alone. Ethan says, I've been wanting to make my own tabletop role-playing game, but always procrastinated. This gives me a reason to just do it. That's awesome. And that's what you should be doing. Creation, the exercise of creationism is awesome. And we're going to talk, I'm sure Daryl's going to talk about something about that, this week. Next week, just to kind of give you a preamble about this, there is the midterm exam. It's here, guys. It's around the corner. It's happening on starting on Monday. So I'm going to release the midterm exam on Monday. That's Monday, October the 4th, 2021. I'd like to release it as early as possible. And what's going to happen is there are two components to it. There's a theoretical component, short answers, and a microblog. So a couple of short answers. It's all going to be around the stuff we've been discussing from week 1 through 4. So it's not like it's I'm going to hit you with something that you haven't seen before. It's just more reflection and going through the stuff that we've talked about. There may be a problem. I may present a problem to you that you may have to solve based on the tools that we've talked about through the first 4 weeks. The second part is the practical component, and you're going to build something with the Unity game engine. And the great thing about that is your TA, Stephen, is going to be available to you on Monday to help guide you through the requirements for your practical component. And what I've asked him to do, and we're going to kind of go over it again and on Sunday just to make sure everything is good, I've asked him to put components in there for everyone. That means I want components for the producers out there. I want components out there for the artists and modelers. I want components for the coders out there. And so that way everyone has a bit of stake in this whole thing, because you're going to build something that's interesting. And it's going to be kind of around mobile games. You're going to build some capability. This is what we want. And so that as we approach the second half of semester, you'll be able to add your skill set onto the rest of your team to hopefully have a really good start to what you're doing over these next 2 semesters. This semester is more like planning and you're prototyping, and next semester you're actually going to be deploying, and hopefully you'll have a really cool product in GDW that you'll be able to show off at something like Level Up Toronto, which is hopefully around the April timeframe. All right, that's typically how it is. Last year they had Level Up Toronto online and remote, kind of a virtual celebration, and Ubisoft hosted it, but unfortunately they only included Sheridan. So hopefully they'll include other schools this year as well. So that's coming up, and hopefully this semester and next semester will be enough for you to have something that's really cool that adds to your portfolio. All right. Again, for the midterm exam, it's all open book. So take home. All right. And this will be very similar to the format that you're going to see in your final exam. You'll have the entire week to complete both components. So that's Monday through Saturday. Typically, what we would ask you to do is these components should be completed in a sitting. So you can imagine that the stuff we're going to give you is not going to be, hours and hours of work. I'm not going to try and give you a week's worth of work. It should be a few hours. That's what I'm hoping. It'll be combined. That's the theoretical component and the practical component. But I want you to think about it as the theoretical component is like 2 ILEs, 2 in-lab exercises, the practical component, 2 in-lab exercises combined, right? And theoretical component is like a little bit longer. There we go. Jonathan says, still miffed about Gamescom being a little less big last year. Yeah, me too, man. You know what? I would have liked to see it more, but, COVID and all that and us being remote, I think is really, made it challenging for us over the last 2 years. So let's see. Hopefully it'll be better in kind of in the spring of 2022. So far, it looks like many schools are gearing up for in-person learning. We'll see how that goes. Some schools are still remote. York, as an example, is still planning to be fully remote, but let's see how that goes with kind of scheduled events that we have in and around Toronto and the GTA. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. And also from a Gamescom perspective, if we can be in person, we might be able to see and play everyone's game live, which is really what we want. Okay, so that is my preamble. Any questions around any of the stuff that I presented today so far? Because we're going to start going with our guest speaker, Daryl Olson. He's going to come online now and then kind of go over all the stuff that he needs to do. So anyone have any questions before we begin? Again, the good thing about this is if you missed it, we're going to be able to, we're going to record this thing. It's being recorded and broadcast on YouTube. so you'll be able to go through the presentation even if you miss some of it. Okay, if there's no questions, then I am going to stop talking, and I'm gonna give up the floor to Daryl. And Daryl, if you want to share your screen, then we can, yeah, and then you can go ahead. So,
hello, everybody. Thank you very much. That was my first. The first thing that was complete enough and cohesive enough that not only could I give it to my friends and they could review it and understand a bit about what it's going to be like to be in this world, but also for me, it's a place where I can start to step off and create things, iterate really in greater detail. So, what that I wanted to, Daryl, talk about world building. I mean, it's truly daunting in a way, right? Building an entire world. It's like a godlike activity. But really what is to create an authentic and believable world, a place, and it can be used to tell stories and play games, any and all matter. The scope of the world, that's something that you're going to pick right, like at the very, very beginning. Because I got to say, like, while I've successfully built worlds in a role playing sense, there's, I've never really made a whole entire world. That's so ambitious. But, it kind of can start with a continent, country. You can make like a province, a city. You can even like really deeply make a neighborhood, a community. And that's a place, where lots of stories can be told. Of course, these places, they can be most anything that you can imagine, anything that inspires you to keep on creating and writing. If you build a space station, it's a world. If you build a lost island of some sort, that's going to be the world for the players. So you decide the scope and shape of your world, and that right away makes the process a lot less daunting by putting reasonable barriers and limits. How much space do you need to tell the kind of stories that you want to start to tell? What it gets down to is basically you're creating. Eventually, there's enough patches that it creates a quilt, let's call it, and this is enough. This is enough to start your players. This is enough places for them to explore, enough different ideas that you throw at them, and sights and sounds, and it's good to go. But really, it's a never-ending endeavor. World building can take years and years. And if you run, in the case of Dungeons and Dragons, if you have a successful game and the characters are rising through levels and they want to learn more and see more and do more, you're always just sort of building out, trying to create something new for them that will satisfy them, that will carry your story along, things like that. Of course, professionally, world building, it requires massive teams for, say, an open world game. by a large video game company. There's hundreds, if not sometimes thousands, of people contributing to make that world feel like a lived-in place, like the place that you are visiting, and where anything that happens there is on some level plausible. It's almost like every organized crime and gangster and mafia movie that they had to offer from all different parts of the world. It just became a genre that I really decided at my, in my years that I actually really liked. I like the stories, I like the acting and everything else like that. And I said, well, what if there was the D&D game that really brought a lot of that culture, that mostly American movie culture or gangster movie culture into a game. On top of that, I'm married into an Italian family, and I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time in Italy, particularly Florence. And the culture there is something that I wanted to just bring over into this game. This beautiful city full of stone architecture, hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's full of art, statues, town squares, like piazzas that are gorgeous, palazzos that are stately and beautiful. And I just kind of wanted it all to mix together into this place. So that was me, basically. Now, and finally, I guess the third thing is Suncrest. A lot with my games is that uh, I went to the Caribbean islands a lot in my youth, and I always just thought the tropical island motif was just always something that was so beautiful and fascinating that you could be, on a beach. The water's out there. There could be a boat on the water. It could sail anywhere to other islands. The whole thing. I brought that in more than once into my games. The idea that you're on a tropical paradise, and if you want to get involved in boats and nautical adventures, that it's there for you. So, anything that you've experienced in your life, your family and friends, the culture,
uh,
uh,
any kind
any
of
kind
art
of
or
art or
books,
books,
things like
things like
that,
that,
movies,
movies,
novels.
novels.
Mythology is
Mythology is
also a
also a
great
great
place
place
to
to
dig, but
dig,
you
but you
can,
can,
find the
find the
things that
things
you
that you
like
like
and
and
maybe
maybe
try
try
spinning it
spinning
all
it all
together and
together
see
and
what
see
kind
what
of
kind of
concoction you
concoction you
get,
get,
what it
what it
might
might
end up
end up
looking
looking
like.
like.
And I
And
would
I
say,
would say,
with
with
my
my
this
this
particular with
particular
Suncrest,
Suncrest,
what I
what I
did
did
is that
is
I
that I
actually
actually
pulled a
pulled a
lot of
lot of
things from
things from
earlier
earlier
games I
games I
did and
did
just
and just
added it
added it
wholesale.
wholesale.
And
And
then
then
after
after
going
going
through
through
like
like
second,
second,
third
third
drafts, I
drafts, I
started to
started to
change
change
things, make
things, make
them
them
more
more
unique.
unique.
So I
So
would
I
say
would say
like
like
you can
you could
steal like
steal
from
like
the
from the
entire
entire
world
world
to
to
build
build
yours,
yours.
right? There's
Right?
no
There's no
copyright
copyright
really
really
until
until
you
you
start to
start
try
to
to
try
make
to make
money off
money
it.
off it.
But
But
the thing
the
is,
thing
you
is,
can
you
take
can
for
take
in
for
the
in an
initial
initial
creative
creative
stage, you
stage,
can
you
take
can take
anything you
anything you
want,
want,
anything at
anything at
all,
all,
put it
put it
together, and
together,
then
and then
change it
change it
later
later
to make
to
it
make it
more
more
unique.
unique.
The nice
The
thing
nice
though
thing
is to
though is
try
to
to
try
get
to get
started
started
quickly
quickly
and to
and to
just
just
use as
use as
much
much
of the
of the
world
world
around you
around
as you
you as you
can.
can.
Now,
Now,
the
the
document again
document
I
again I
gave you,
gave you,
uh,
uh,
just and
just and
again just
again,
as
just
an
as an
example, it's
example,
not
it's
like
not
you
like
have
you
to
have to
read it
read it
or
or
ever,
ever,
you it's just
it's
there
just
to
there to
sort of
sort of
as a
as a
proof
proof
really.
really.
It's
It's
written
written
specifically for
specifically for
Dungeons and
Dungeons and
Dragons
Dragons
fifth
Fifth
edition,
Edition,
but the
but the
content
content
itself
itself
is
is
game
game
mechanic
mechanic
agnostic.
agnostic,
And that
and that
means
means
that
that
anything you
anything you
build, when you
build, when
start
you
to
start
deal
to
with
deal with
world
world
building,
building,
many
many
games can
games
be
can be
put
put
into it.
into it.
You can
You
put
can
it
put
into
it into
many
many
different
different
places and
places and
situations.
situations.
It's a
It's a
tapestry
tapestry
that you
that
can
you can
drape
drape
over a
over a
bunch of
bunch
game
of game
mechanics and
mechanics, a
game
game
systems.
system, and give it flavor. And I put examples like the Lord of the Rings. It's been movies and books, video games, Harry Potter, the same thing, Star Wars, the Marvel comics, Pokemon, which my kids loved. And there was so many different mediums to engage in Pokemon, that world, the way it felt to walk around as a kid with no parents, throwing these devices that have wild animals. I mean, it's a fantasy, but you could watch it as a show. You could play it as a card game, video games, all kinds of different ways where the how it felt, its flavor, its texture was put onto a completely different game mechanic. And that's what world building does. It's one of the advantages. That like if you build something, it's not just for this one thing. You can keep it, you can keep developing it, and you can put it in other places. Now, in terms of resources or what constitute world building, it's such a purely creative endeavor that almost anything creative can be really helpful. My my focus is writing. That's how I work best. I feel that's like what I find the easiest and the most rewarding. I believe with the Suncrest document there were a couple digital maps, and they're pathetic. I'm terrible at that. Absolutely terrible. I tried my hand at it, made something very basic, and I said, okay, for now, it's okay, it's so good. But other people can build worlds in any way that they want. People can write. People who are artists can draw. People can take photography. You can search for photos on the internet. That's a great way to start building a world out of postcards, snapshots, cartography, maps. Very valuable, right? Music and poetry, any kind of endeavor can really like add something to a world. The same goes with real life experiences. I can tell you that there are many, many scenes and settings and things that I've done, whether for world building or encounters, but it was because of a hike, camping, flying to another country or getting out on the water. It's all good fuel. It all can go into world building in some level or form, right? Because you're working again back to the patch. You're working on a small piece of the world. It doesn't necessarily have to attach right away to anything else, but it all contributes eventually. It feeds into something bigger. Suncrest, I broke down the neighborhoods and gave a description of the neighborhood. And then I put a list of these institutions, business, special places, not just the regular houses that you might see here and there, or the small dive bar which doesn't have a big sign, but some of the more bigger prominent places, the places that would first catch the eye of the character, the player, as they're walking through that neighborhood. And there's a list of names, and I give an occupation to them, where they may sit. Now this is very vague information. I give it so that the players can know some names, some faces, who's in charge of what building or that building, or who to ask for, something like that, like a very basic travel guide or tour guide. One part about this particular D&D game I'm making that was really revolutionary for me, and Tom mentioned it before, that was Hero Lab. During the pandemic, all of us middle-aged guys, we said, no, let's try our best to keep our games going, to keep playing games. And so it got a lot more digital for us from some of the first time. And Hero Lab was this resource that I could start to create all kinds of different characters very, very quickly. So what I set out to do to be ready for the first play is that all the names in Suncrest there, they have stats. Some of them are just simply characters of a certain level in a certain class. Others are much simpler even. They're a template character, of which there are many. Some of them are monsters. Straight up, there's about half a dozen of them, like, they're a vampire. And I just gave them vampire stats. They may have different names, they may be in different places of town. Effectively, they're the same stat, and they're the same type of threat. This makes it very quick so that I did roughly about 120 NPCs. These are the people now that inhabit the world, some of the most familiar faces, people that players can meet. And so this creates now all kinds of opportunity for conversation to bring plot points around. These people have interests, they have an alignment, like an outlook on good, evil, life, death, these kind of important questions of our ethics. They all have something basic statted out. place that actually endless. So I wanted to talk a bit about the level of granularity, how how much detail you put into something. There is a gray area where world building becomes an intentional location. Really, the fundamental difference is that when you are world building, it's a place where life goes on. If you make a big bar and inn, a few floors, maybe you can seat 150 people at the bottom, there's rooms up at the top, some other business up in the attic. But this is the place where day after day life goes on. People wake up, they eat, they work. They may venture a little farther away from their personal world, but they always come back to sleep. And life happens in that place. Once you focus down from, say, that inn, in my analogy here, down to a room in the inn, a private room, this is where something happens now. This is where uh, something lively, not just a regular everyday routine. In fact, what happens in that room is going to disrupt the daily routine. This is the difference between a world in which kind of the status quo is just ticking along, and all of a sudden, boom, there's an event, and something happens. And now this place is different. It's different than it was yesterday, right? And that's the memorable event that your encounters should create within the world that has been built. And when that happens, when a world and encounters collide, there's an aftermath. Now, let's say in that private room we were talking about, a big fight breaks out. Daggers and knives are drawn, and it's ugly. We won't get into it. But in the end, what happens? A table got knocked over, some chairs got ruined. It gets all cleaned up, and by next day it's okay. The blood stains have been scrubbed out. The world basically was unchanged by that encounter. There's nothing wrong with that, and that happens all the time. But if it was different, let's say if there was fire involved, let's say there was an explosion, let's say the back door of that place got blown out. Well, now there's been a change in your world. And when writing adventures, when creating a world and then creating the encounters that could take place in this world, that always has to be taken into account. Because you don't want to create something that simply cannot be changed by an event. Life doesn't work like that, and your games shouldn't either, as much as possible. If players are end up in a place like that, like no matter what happens, it's always the same the next day, then it's like a static environment. And players don't really respond well to static environments. They lose interest. They don't become invested. The players who are in your world, they're agents of change, ideally. They're there to mess stuff up sometimes, or they're there to make things better, or they're there to take a piece of that, to carve a piece of your world and make it their own. And you have to have allowance for this kind of behavior, because if they can't live in that and succeed and fail, if the stakes are skewed where they're not able to affect anything, they become just simply a prisoner. Not so different than the NPCs, the non-player characters that you create to populate the world. As a long-term project, again, it's like writing a novel. It's like painting on a great canvas. Sometimes you don't want to do it. And what I found helpful is a couple P's. Piecemeal, keep it small. If you want to build a world, do one tiny thing every day. The contributions add up. This is sort of advice that I would give to anybody, like when they have an overwhelming job, which can happen to us every day in every aspect of our life. Never do nothing. Even just do a tiny thing. And it will build up and build up and build up as time goes on. The other one is point of view. I was writing about Suncrest sometimes, and I just got a little bit like in the weeds and stuff, and I wrote something else completely different. It's in the same world, but it's not even on the same landmass. It's completely out there, and it looks at Suncrest from this completely different point of view. This what it did, it just created this whole other story arc that'll come out later in the game. And it can be very helpful. It can be a palate cleanser, refreshing, to create something that's completely not about the world you're building or the place you're building, and instead maybe you're creating an antagonist without even knowing it. Maybe you're just creating a whole other thing. But it keeps you creating, and it can be worthwhile. And the other one also is sometimes when I get a bit mired in the weeds is perspective. Who am I even making this stuff for? Well, in my case, I'm making it for my friends. And I've taken requests from my friends. In times past, there was a notion that like, I want a game with a lot of combat. I want to do a lot of fighting. And I was like, okay, I always kept that in mind. So if I said, well, what am I doing? Why am I making this? I would maybe take some notes from what people have said, what we've played before. With my friends, it's an ongoing conversation. And I try to listen to what they're looking for. And then I try to add it into the mix. It's the foundation which makes everything else easier to build once it's done or in a state a state that feels at least at some level of detail complete. If you built a world out and created a document as I did, like with Suncrest, right, as a starting point, I immediately have a list of places, people, neighborhoods. There's a bit of history, some maps, a sense of how it all works together, and then I start creating. If I needed to make an encounter about a bar brawl, well, I get to pick a bar now. And just picking it and the neighborhood it's in, and knowing what kind of occupants, the social class of the occupants, I start to immediately narrow down my choices until I have something that is everything that I wanted and it fits into the world by limiting my choices. That's kind of the beauty of it. It's a context that's already there now. And it's a space that when player characters enter it, there's an immediate feeling that it existed before them. And that if they never even went, they just passed it by on the street, it would still be there, going on as rowdy as it ever was. This kind of foundation is just in general a really strong place to write a story. And the thing with in terms of creating anything, I don't know if other people feel like this, but when I finally, because I procrastinate on writing all the time, but when I write a couple pages, I immediately get the urge to write a couple more. And I believe it would probably be the same in any other kind of format. Like once you start that creative engine going, new ideas come up in your mind and you have already something to build off of. And it just allows that process to happen so much easier because you've made very important choices early on. You know? Sunquest, as I said before, just as the example in my little world building talk, it's in a more tropical place. There's water and boats and people can go sailing. So I don't have to worry about polar bears or ice caps. Unless I really want to make a story about that because it's so unusual that it would be there. The idea that I'm clearing off all kinds of environments, all kinds of culture, all kinds of choices so that And this is my first time talking about this to students, so your kindness is appreciated. If there's any questions or anything like that.
And thank you, Daryl. I was just going to come on just to show my image here, just to kind of come up on the video there for a second, and just to say that you know what, I want to invite you guys to ask your questions. I see that there's a bunch of questions here in the chat for you, Daryl. So, or some
Okay, I'm gonna look at the
comments.
chat now. Actually,
Yeah.
did I stop sharing my screen?
No, it's fine. It's fine. You can keep
Leave it?
sharing.
Okay, I'll just leave it. I can go back to those slides if people want, or they can get copies, of course. Let me just find.
So I think what I'm looking for from everybody is questions for Daryl. So things like that's relevant to what he was speaking about, but you can also ask him other questions. Like if you want to ask him, for example, you know, what games he plays, what are his influences, those kind of things. You can certainly do that. Heck, I'll even start.
Yeah, I was going to start with that, and I totally forgot.
Hey, no problem.
I'll answer what I'm playing and what I find interesting these days, for sure. I'm always looking for new people online to play stuff.
All right. So I was going to say, so what is, if I was going to ask your the games that you're playing right now, and I think I know what they are, but can you explain? And this, I was just going to start this things going, guys. What games do you love to play, and what motivates you to play them? If you want to talk about that.
I'd say in terms of video games, I've always been fascinated by first-person shooters. I just think the immersion in that kind of environment is second to none. It's absolutely blew me away when I first saw it. It still wows me more than any other video game format. So right now, I'm playing Destiny. Just kind of glommed onto a persistent first world shooter, and play Destiny 2 is formerly the name, but I don't just call it Destiny. And other games that really impress me are From Software, company from Japan. They make Demon Souls, Dark Souls series, Bloodborne. Their latest game is Sekiro. They have the new game Elden Ring is coming out, which looks to be a very, very ambitious bit of world building.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Their first open world game. Those games I just think are the pinnacle of video game design right now in our time. They're not only incredibly beautiful, but their narration is amazing. Their world building is excellent, and also it's a type of video game where it really avoids some of the more unsavory elements of modern video game design: microtransactions, loot boxes, seasons passes. You know, it's nice to have a video game company that still just kind of makes a game and you can play the game. You know. Other than that, obviously Dungeons and Dragons is still a game that we try to get together and play with every couple of weeks. And I've started to learn about Warhammer 40K.
That's
and
awesome.
all that's involved in that, which is just so much, right?
Yeah.
But I got a few friends now who are playing it, and they're on Discord and they're building their armies, and I'm just happy to be a part of that, even just as a spectator for now.
We're going to try and draw you in, but let's ask some other questions here as well. One of the questions, here's some questions that are coming down the pipe here from Day. I know you spoke about the gangster genre as being a huge influence on Suncrest, I guess, but I wanted to know what movies really stood out to you. What do you take most inspiration from in that genre? Do you go back and see if there's something you can add in just in case you are low on ideas? in America. In America.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time in America.
Yeah,
that's
that's
a
a good
really different one. It's more of a European take, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of atmosphere in there. Not my favorite, I would say, but quite good. The Sopranos, that got another viewing. I tried to absorb as much as I could of that. On a little more lighthearted note, there's a show called Lilyhammer, which was really quite surprising to me, but it's quite a good version of a gangster story in that way. I guess that's kind of the first things that come to mind. But I've really I've seen a bunch of everything, including some documentaries and things like that about figures of history, the Cotton Club, Oni Madden, one of the archetypes of the modern American gangster. And of course, on YouTube, there's a lot of interesting people who have stories to tell at this point in time. Michael Francesi, who was a notable mafia capo regime, he kind of is talking about it more than any other time before. It seems like all the people he did business with have died or are going to be in jail for the rest of their lives. So he sort of made a bit of a career out of talking openly about what happened in his life, and I found that very interesting as well.
There's another question from Ryan. It says, is there ever a time when you scale a world too big, as in when you go too far, and it seems there's nowhere else to take the story? Would you say that there's a real limit to it, or is it the limit of the writer?
I would say that in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, let's keep it to that format just for now. When characters get to a certain place where they may start to sort of have seen and done almost everything in the world, in the place that you've built, there's always the outer planes, which is where everything is just sort of leveled up. The stakes are higher, and everything is more powerful. And so there's always a place you can go to, to challenge your characters, to throw them into a new environment. And so for D&D, the Outer Planes is that answer. I think though, no matter where you send your players or send the story, the thing with world building is that they don't just, been my experience that they don't just they're not just visitors there. They don't just move through and just want to go to the next, port of call, see the next thing. They've got an investment in some way or form. They start to create roots. So your world building becomes home for them. And that's a powerful thing. And there's always a reason to come home, one way or the other, for one reason or another. And so, in terms of, on one level, building the entire world or building it to a point where players would become tired with the whole world, that hasn't been my experience. Usually they seem fairly content, even in a smaller place, like a little city-state like Suncrest. But the voyages that they can take, whether they get on a boat or go through a magical portal, well, there's so much to work for. And I don't even think that in a Dungeons and Dragons framework, the characters only have 20 levels really at this stage of the game. And so unless you're playing a much older version of D&D where there's epic levels, there's going to be more world than levels for characters to get up and experience the game. So it's really about finding a balance,
All right, that's great. Fardeen says, when starting to build a world, what do you generally start with? Example, a character, location. What do you do? Where do you start?
Well, I guess really the first thing you start with is a concept. And in my case, it was a concept of an independent city, an independent place that it could provide for itself in any way, shape, or form, and had no real need to engage in all kinds of foreign policy. That it could basically take care of itself. It's really the reason why it was founded. And I said, let's see where a place like that's the beginning. And so Therefore, I got from that idea of like an independent place, a self-sufficient place, I said it'll have to be a walled city. It'll have to be a place that's virtually impregnable. That means it'll have to be a city because it's on the water. It'll have to have a mighty navy. It means it'll have to have an impressive army. And little by little, these are the things. One thing builds another thing, builds another thing. And this is what, made me create a place that I kind of like. I wouldn't mind visiting myself. And that's where it started with a concept.
Trayton says, have you played The Quiet Year? It's like the World Builder's version of D&D.
I have not. And that's the first time I've ever heard about it. The Quiet Year. I'll have to check it out.
Awesome. I got some other small comments, and so I have a question for you while we get any more answers. So there was a world that you had built with the Pathfinder role-playing game beforehand, and I think it lasted something like 10 years, right? You were talking about it a lot with you and a larger group of people. Can you explain a little bit about how that may have influenced the work that you've done here in Suncrest?
Well, right. Even something that you saw he or she did, and it's like, oh, that was good. Like I'm gonna bring that in. Uh, anytime that how you're going to use it will be totally different. It really, especially because like we're in a group. I'm in a group where like everyone takes turns being a dungeon master. So everyone's just feeding off each other. But every time we sit at a table, it's a new game. The game that we're actually playing right now is 100% different than the game that, like Suncrest, the game that I want to start.
I know this is a little bit off topic, but I was going to ask you. So when it comes to the games that you love playing the most, I know we've had lots of conversations, and this is kind of leading into what we talked about with the students, let's say a couple of weeks ago. For me, it's always been about player agency. So I know that sometimes that can be an illusion, that it's not really true. There is no real player agency per se. What are your views on that with respect to world building?
I think that player agency is really one of the most important things that is created in a game. When you feel that your character is compelled to do something based upon something that's deep inside yourself rather than you're just being told by a game to do it. The thing with player agency is that it can be triggered, I think, in my experience. It can be triggered with only a choices, but each choice has to be meaningful. That a choice made doesn't just simply end in a total dead end, or that a choice just puts you onto the track of the second choice. So in other words, you really didn't have 3 choices, maybe you only had 2. Basically, a player should be on some level rewarded for the decision that they made in some level or form. And as long as that's sort of kept in mind when you build an encounter and then you create, say, a moment, and the player has to choose whether to do one thing or another thing, have some thought about where those places go and where they lead the player. And then the player, in my opinion, you don't have to have tremendous variety of choices. Just but if every choice is meaningful, then you really feel like you sort of made your own way through that event, through that encounter. And it's a resolution that you'll stand beside because you made it happen. You made that choice, or you could have done something else.
Okay.
I would worry on, I would say, just quality of choices rather than quantity of choices.
So here's another question: our students, they're going to be in the second assignment that I've given. The first assignment was about an encounter. They built an encounter. And the second assignment, they're actually going to choose the best encounter, and they're going to play it with their team members. Can you, for first-time players, do you have any? Can you recommend any kind of winning strategies when they first sit down to play Dungeons and Dragons? Anything that you can recommend to new players?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that Dungeons and Dragons, like many other role-playing games, is a collaborative storytelling experience. You're there to create something with the DM. The DM will write the setting. He'll write the antagonist. He'll write about the stakes. But it's the player characters. They're the stars of the show. They're the protagonists. They provide the dialogue, and they provide some of the critical choices that push the story through. So it's collaborative, which means that when you sit down with players, and this is something that young players like me, we never got this. That's why there was so much fighting sometimes, so much party kills, self-party kill and all that. It was because we weren't playing as teammates. We were playing as individuals with individual agendas and individual goals and dreams, like being the first one to get the +1 magic sword. But as you get older and more mature, it becomes absolutely a team effort. So the first thing I would do is I'm sitting around with some people. Maybe I know them a little, maybe I know them a lot. But if somebody has already made a couple characters, if you're not the first person, look at what they made. Lots of times the characters that I've ended up playing for years are like, I come in, everyone's got their character. I'm like looking around like, well, you don't have a wizard, or well, you don't have a cleric. Or you need another fighter, so I'll just do that. I'm perfectly fine to just take, whatever's left over, because that character will be a superstar because every character is working as a team and you are a very important part of that. So I would say basically building a team, a party together that complements each other, that can defend each other, that has each other's back, that if one character has a weakness, the other character has the strength. That's the clearest and easiest path to success.
And I think that rolls right into team building in real life. That's something that we can take from the game world and then kind of translate that into the real world. So I think these are good skills. Jonathan says, we can team kill. Let's go. Yeah, you know what, Jonathan? I recommend not. I recommend, just like Daryl's saying, I know you're probably joking around, but I think that, I've had experiences when I was young, just like Daryl. I just add to what Daryl was saying, where I made some choices that really didn't move the story along for the whole party, but really moved the story along for me, right? And I thought that, when you're young, you make those kind of choices because it's exciting to have that kind of control. It's exciting to get out of your skin for a second and be immersed in the role-playing world. But I think it becomes long-term, it becomes counterproductive to the story, right? If you're fighting against each other the whole time. Again, there's different kinds of games. I'm not going to say that there's not games where some DMs like that. They want to pit the players against each other. I know that there's been games where we've played where we're all evil characters, like that kind of campaign. I played in a game like that too. But for the most part, I think what Daryl's saying is I agree with him, which is it's absolutely essential that you build a party that complements each other, especially in the first time around, right? While you're learning the game. So
until they betray you, and then you have your honor to consider. And
there's no betrayal.
They happen.
There's no betrayal. What are you talking about? There's no betrayal.
Right? It happens. I'm saying that's the beauty of a game like this, that it's always an option to put on the table.
Absolutely.
Is Tom trustworthy in D&D? Let me say no. No. That's
not true.
He's a maniac. I don't want to talk of Professor Tom in any unsavory way, but yeah, he's I can go on and on. What I did in Suncrest, this was different than something that I never did before. But because, again, pandemic and getting together in smaller groups, something kind of neat happened. I made my little world, my little city, and I put the first level characters in, but I solo played all of them. There are 5 characters in this game thus far, and I solo played them all by themselves from first level to second level. They had to be on their own. They met a couple of NPCs who could back them up in a fight or on a little heist, a caper, but they basically navigated the first level of experience on their own, making their own choices, finding out where they're going to live, and just sort of setting themselves up. And now that every character has done that, it took about 6 months, of casual playing. Some people took 2 sessions, some people took 3 sessions, but eventually every character got up from first level to second level. There was no depth. They're a little powerful, a little more wide, and they all have like a little bit of a base of operations of their own. Now, the next time we play this game, the second level characters all come back together. They knew each other from before. I've set up the story, and so each of them got to be on their own and do what they want, and experience the city of Suncrest in their own fashion, and go with what they liked and walk away from what they didn't like. Overall, it was so successful, I felt, and a great way to introduce characters into your world. And Tom was by far the most chaotic. And just everything, just an absolute maniac. He got cursed by a witch
and survived.
He got captured.
All right.
He got captured because he failed in this assassination type thingy, and he got and he stole from a witch's hotel. Very bad. Like, she's a maid, witch. You don't want to be doing this kind of things, right? And he was caught, and the witch said the witch wasn't going to kill him because he's a student from a prestigious school and he's just out of college, and it's like that would make a headline, But she wanted to make an example, and she said, "I'll curse you," right? If you read through the Suncrest, where he got tied up with the Fontana Hotel, and the owner is Freda Strega, basically just straight up witch. And she cursed him, and he rolled a natural 20. He actually saved, and he's not cursed. And she laughed so hard that she booted him out and said, "Okay, you can get away with that." And now he's called Lucky in the game. His name is Wex Fane, but everyone just calls him Lucky.
I don't condone that name, Lucky.
That's kind of the beauty of the game mechanics, the randomness of the dice, creating a story that I never intended to write. It's kind of awesome that way. But yeah, no, Tom is, that's not even the first story of Tom being a terrible person in the game. He's more often terrible than not.
Tom the Terrible. That's right. Well, it's true. You know what? To be honest with you,
but by the same token, let's just say Tom himself has had games like a Marvel superhero game that we played forever through our 20s, like teens and 20s. That was like, we played so much, and Tom was the DM all the time. So I guess when he gets a chance to be a player, he really likes to act out and exercise some demons, something like that.
You know what it is, and this is where it comes down to, and we'll kind of close out with these thoughts. And I really appreciate that you came out tonight and kind of talked with the students and did your little your thoughts around world building, which was so important. But I think one thing that Dungeons and Dragons and role playing does for us in general, and I think for us that have played the game for a long, long time, is it allows you, like I said, to get out of your skin. And sometimes it's not just the game, playing the character, but actually getting together with your friends, getting together with, people that you haven't seen. I think maybe my last kind of outing in Suncrest was a result of being cooped up because of COVID for so long. I'm going to chalk it up to that. All right. And also being really excited to have true agency in a game. I think that's one thing that Daryl does really, really well when it comes to being a DM. He'll allow you to kill yourself. He'll allow you to do crazy stuff, and he'll punish you for it. And that's how it should be in any kind of game that we play. But I think that's what it was. You get a chance to to kind of roll out of your skin, and a chance to play a different character altogether. And that's the beautiful thing about role-playing games. So any other thoughts, Daryl, before, or any other questions, guys, before we say goodbye to Daryl for today? Daryl, any thoughts for you? Any closing thoughts?
No, thank you very much. I'd just like to take a moment to express my gratitude for being able to talk to you guys about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I've talked with Tom, and he says that some assignment may be based upon the writing that I did, and that I welcome your feedback. Tom can pass it to me at a later date, but I wish you all good luck at game building and design.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Take care. We'll see you shortly.
Have a good evening.
Take care. All right. Well, that was Daryl's little talk about world building. I think it was really great. We had a chance to kind of work with I would say a person who's been doing those kinds of things in terms of like role playing and world building for a long time, a very long time. And I'm talking about, I think he was kind of light when he said it. I would say about 30 years all told, right? That's a long time to be doing world building, and not just being a great DM, but an awesome player, right? Is part of what makes a great game. And I think what you're going to see is it's not just about the video game stuff or tabletop role playing. It kind of transcends some of the stuff that we've been playing today. Let's just shift gears 1 second before we take a short break, because right now we're sitting around 7:45. I think Daryl did a good job of talking about world building, but let's talk about some assignment stuff. So again, you guys were able to make the encounter. That's kind of the thing that you guys were talking about or working with in the last assignment. And then the first in-class exercise, you kind of reported on on narrative design. Rui's talk is what we did last time. So this assignment here, in-class exercise 2, which is going to be due this Friday at midnight, is another short writing exercise. Again, and I've been asked about the length, and can I do it in bullet form? I think bullet form is okay as long as you hit the highlights of what I'm asking here. And I've asked you a bunch of questions, and I do this every time we do a blog, and I'll do kind of something similar to this on the midterm exam. So let's talk about this a little bit. So the first thing is you're going to make a micro blog about world building in Suncrest. So think about, take a look at those materials that Daryl's provided for you. He's provided a few things, some images that he shared, as well as a PDF version of the Suncrest campaign for you. It's not a crazy amount of work, but enough that you can start delving into it and figuring out how you like it, what he's written, and kind of think about the things he talked about in terms of writing things in patches and how that grows. How it's an iterative process, like any art, I think. And so that's the first thing. So what did he use? What elements did he use to create the setting and related themes? What encounter opportunities do you think are possible with the lore and the backstory presents? So take a look at actually read the document a little bit. Critique the documentation presented. Do you think it's good? Why or why not? Would you use this for your own games? Is there something missing? Would you add something else? If you were writing this document, if you were creating Suncrest, how would you approach it? If you were the world builder, if you will. And then finally, how would you incorporate this world into a video game? I mean, we've been talking a lot about tabletop role-playing games, which are social games. which are the influence for many of our video games that are role playing games as well, or computer role playing games, CRPGs, as an example. So, how would you incorporate this in, and what platform do you think works best? Is it PC, a console type game? If you're going to make it a mobile game, and how would that work? Again, keep it within 250 to 500 words in length. I don't want it to make it super big. And if you want to include other kind of screenshots or animated GIFs, if you're going to make an argument that it should be one way and you saw the documentation in another way from that Daryl's provided, then anything like that can support your writing, I think is worthy. And again, I think it's a great opportunity for you guys to reflect on world building and to have a chance to do a little bit of it yourselves in some ways through Suncrest. All right. So Day says, don't know if it was mentioned, but what is the playtime on Suncrest? What do you mean by that playtime? Do you mean how much time have we played on it so far? Again, Daryl mentioned it was been about on and off for about 6 months is what we've been doing. And I have to talk about this a little bit. Tabletop role-playing games like D&D, or he mentioned Marvel Superheroes, or any of those kind of games. I'll tell you the last one we're playing a campaign right now with another dungeon master, but we're taking turns. His name is Dan, and Dan's created this world called Dusk, and Dusk has lasted for about in and out of real time for about a year and a half. So that's how long it's gone on. But at the same time, sometimes what ends up happening, we have these little breaks, and kind of on the off weeks, we play every couple weeks just to keep things going and to see each other. I think that's really the main gist of everything. Is one part of it is socializing, the social aspect, getting together, seeing old friends that we haven't seen in a long time. We always, kind of spend 6 hours typically. We're there from probably around 6 o'clock till midnight every other Friday. That's typically the way we do it. Sometimes we're there later if the encounter goes a little long, or sometimes we're there earlier if the DM has planned a longer encounter. It could be up to 8 hours that we play at the same time. We take breaks. There is food. There is merriment. There is a bunch of stuff said at the table that it stays at the table. But at the end of the day, we have a good time. It's a fun time for all, for the most part. And I think sometimes we get into arguments. Sometimes we complain about rules, about Dungeons and Dragons. We complain about something that was done or how it was played out in an encounter. Could have been done differently. And we try and keep the meta low, which means we try and talk like we're the character. We don't talk like we're the players. I don't talk Tom to Daryl. It's, my character with his character. A lot of times keep it in context. And when we're not playing the game, when we take a short break, then we go and, we're back to normal again. It's almost like that we crossed the wall there. Anyway, so that is the in-class exercise. Going back to this, that is due on Friday. Any questions around the format, the stuff that's due, any concerns around this? I think this is a good exercise for you guys to take a look at, and I think it'll give you enough practice again for the midterm exam that's coming up next week. Okay, so for now, I think this is a great place to take a pause. I want to come back after the break and start talking about social networks and social games. Going back to that social game aspect, so the part of the lecture that follows up world building, and then I've got about something like 20 slides in that lecture, that talk. So it should take us probably till close to the end. I want to have some discussion about this. And again, if you have any questions, and if you didn't want to bring them up during the recording of Daryl's recording or anything like that, if you want to have comments or whatever, you can certainly talk offline. But I welcome any kind of comments or thoughts because, kind of getting a guest speaker is tough. And I think the ability for us to have somebody to come in and talk to you guys about their experiences, 30 years of experience, is an awesome opportunity. So try and ask as many questions as you can. The next speaker that we have coming in, again, is just after our mid-semester break, is another person that I know very well, again, more than 30 years. And they've been an awesome play tester, a person that's gone and played many types of games, tabletop role-playing games, strategy games of different kinds, and all those kind of things. And they're going to come at you with a whole different type of perspective than what Daryl's talking about from the viewpoint of the player. And I think I'm really looking forward to that talk again, because it's totally different than world building. It's about character. And we'll talk about, he'll be talking about that more than anything else. All right, so let's take a short break. I'm just going to stop recording here on YouTube. And when we come back, we'll start talking about social networks. All right, and we're sitting at 7:52. Let's take about 10 minutes, so we'll come back.